Jordan, I was talking with Mike just a little bit before this call started, and you mentioned there's not necessarily a major that like leads us into doing campus ministry. And so my entree into campus ministry actually started at the St. Louis County Jail. That's where I met my current boss. And as part of my ministry practicum, I was doing ministry with some of the inmates there. And my boss, Troy, volunteers to do communion services for inmates in the county jail. And when I was finishing my master's, that's where I was getting my hands-on ministry experience. I didn't necessarily have an idea that I was heading towards campus ministry at that point in time. But on Holy Thursday of that year, Father Gary, who is our priest here at the Newman Center, came in to our communion service to wash the feet of the inmates there, inspired by Pope Francis, no doubt. And it was in that moment that I didn't feel necessarily called to campus ministry specifically, but in being in that space with ministers that I saw as mentors, I was like, they have something and I want that. I want to learn how to minister in that way. I want to be formed to minister in the ways that they're ministering. By the end of the liturgy, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. And I just remember the powerful connection and the ways in which God's love and mercy just felt really tangible in that space. And so kind of half joking as we were leaving, this was my first time meeting Father Gary. I was like, well, I graduate in a month, so if you have any jobs, let me know. And a couple of weeks later, got hired on. Like many of you, what led me to campus ministry was not the same thing that's necessarily kept me here in campus ministry. And so since coming to WashU, it's a very different context than being at the county jail in St. Louis. It's one of the more prestigious universities in the Midwest, and students are predominantly coming from very privileged means. And yet, I'm struck by the fact that people are wrestling with similar questions to the questions that I encountered in the jail, of people trying to make sense of how God's present in their lives, being invited into sharing people's lives, their joys and their confounding moments. And I'm still struck at the ways in which my entering into relationship with our students continues to form me and inspire me and challenge me to actually live my faith out day to day. So thank you, Mike, for this opportunity to share a little bit of my story. And just want to say thank you all to all on this call for continuing again to inspire me, to form me, to challenge me in my ministry here. And it's with great pleasure that I am going to be turning things over to Reverend Gerard here in just a moment. I grew up in the Diocese of Springfield in Illinois, where Father Augustus Tolton was a priest in Quincy. So it is a great honor to be connected in this way during these office hours. So thank you.
All right, Father Jordan, over to you. Thank you so much for being our special guest today. Oh, I think you're muted, Father.
All righty. Very good. Thanks for the invitation. I'm excited to be here. I am very grateful to Brother Barrow and Mike and Michelle. We all had fun yesterday. Mike was being very kind. If I'm not as funny as he says I am, please laugh when I tell a joke. So we cannot make Mike a tattletale. But the story of Father Augustus Tolton is the thing I want to share with you today. If you think Father Tolton and his story is about a priest getting ordained, not true. Let's get that out the way real quick. Father Tolton's story is really about the gospel of Jesus Christ lived in a time and in an era when it was very difficult if you were a person of color, and especially if you were a Catholic person of color, to live out the gospel and find a witness or find a refuge in that gospel. And Father Tolton is the Christ story in the figure. He's the Christ figure in the story who comes to the minds of people when we turn back the pages. I want to give you a little backstory before we go into Father Tolton's life on how he came to be a hidden figure. So you have a young man who was born an enslaved person. He comes to Freedom's Gate by crossing the Mississippi. He is in the Diocese of Alton at the time, which eventually became the Diocese of Springfield. And he crosses the Mississippi into freedom with his family. He is a Catholic, baptized, born into a Catholic family. He is not a convert. He is a little boy in freedom, about 9 years old. And as a free person of color, after escaping slavery, he lives the life of an average young man now at the time in the 1800s who has no education, but has a love of the gospel and a love of church. And so he finds himself with family, and they meet extended family. That extended family is a German priest, an Irish priest, immigrant nuns called the Sisters of Notre Dame. He meets the Franciscans at Quincy College, and he becomes a student on a college campus only because of the kindness of others. When no one would accept him into the classroom because of the color of his skin, he got rejected and kicked out of schools. First an Irish school, then a German school, and then he got bullied by his own kind at a Black mission school. And then when he wasn't accepted into the seminary, they were kind enough to just let him sit in the class with the seminarians, and he learned. And so it's a story of many people, family, friends, priests, nuns, professors, peers in the classroom. This is a story of how the gospel of Jesus Christ is a collective experience and a journey. I want to share a clip with you about that historical piece of Father Tolton's life that was done by the Vocations Office in the Archdiocese of Philadelphia. The postulator for the cause for the canonization of Father Tolton is Bishop Joseph Perry, and you'll hear his voice narrating this brief vocational and promotional story. Now, it's a unique vocation story and a unique vocation tool to recruit young men into the seminary. Why? Because it's focused in on an African-American priest. Highly unusual, beautifully unique. Take a look at it and tell me what you think.
You know, the United States thinks of itself as the most advanced country on the face of the earth. If that's true, they should be able to accept a Black priest. If they have never seen one, well, then they have to see one now. Tolton's mother was worth $50. And little Tolton, who was a boy of 9 at the time, was marked at $25. She saw these dealers coming around looking at everything and bidding on everything, including the slaves. Her husband had already went off to fight in the war on the Union side. He died of dysentery at a camp in Arkansas. It was the farm where he grew up in his boyhood until his mother took the escape. They were caught by some Confederates near Hannibal, Missouri. There were some Union troops who came upon the scene and reminded the slave catchers that They were standing on Union soil. So the Confederates had to back off, but they didn't back off entirely. And they found, just by chance, a dilapidated rowboat that was there on the shore. And they told her, "Ma'am, you have to take it from here. We can't go any further." And she made it across to the other side, which was the state of Illinois, which Illinois was a free state. After the slaves were freed by Abraham Lincoln, there really was no program of assimilation or acclimation for freed slaves to get into mainstream society. And for a while, Tolton wasn't going to school at all. Until one day, an Irish priest by the name of Father Peter McGurr saw this black boy across the street standing there looking, staring at the church. And he looked kind of hungry, so he gave him some food and found out where he lived. And was talking to Tolton's mother and said, "You know, this boy really should be in school." So she told him the story that she had him in school, but nobody would keep the kid into the school because he was black, that kind of thing. So Father Peter McGurr said, "Bring him to my school. And if anybody has any problem with it, they'll have to deal with me." It was in the midst of him going to school there and then being what we would call today a religion teacher or catechist that the sisters and the priests noticed that he might have a religious vocation. Others thought they were I think they were kind of forward-thinking priests and sisters, socially minded. And they seemed to think that if black Catholics would get anywhere, they certainly needed their own clergy. And these people began praying and writing, looking for some niche in a seminary where he might go. So they tried writing to different seminaries to see if they would take him. But no one would take a black student in those days. Institutions, by and large, were not open to blacks. It wasn't understood that blacks could be educated. After receiving all these no's, it was over about 7 or 8 years, the Franciscan fathers came up with an idea to see if they could get him in the seminary in Rome. After a little over a year, they got the answer finally that he was accepted. He got on a train, took him to New Jersey. From New Jersey, took a ship to France. From France, and trains down to Italy. And he was there. So in the midst of his studies, he was studying the continent of Africa. He was even picking up a couple dialects from other African students who were his classmates and that. And that's what he was settled upon, that he probably would never go back home again and then go to Africa as a priest. It's one of the interesting turning chapters in his life of how everything changed. The night before he was ordained a priest, the cardinal prefect of the propaganda, a man by the name of Giovanni Simeoni, took Tolton aside and told him, "You know, the vote was to send you to Africa after your ordination." And he had already taken that oath, I think at least a year or two before. But the cardinal said, I overturned that decision. We're going to send you back home to the United States to be a missionary there. He was ordained on the Easter Vigil of 1886 with his class, and then in July he was on his way back to Quincy. Tolton was a news sensation simply because he was black. No one had ever seen a Roman collar on the neck of a black man before.
What do you think? Isn't that just phenomenal? That is such a wonderful story, a wonderful video. If you don't know the story of Father Tolton, I hope that clip is at least whet your palate that you want more, and that appetizer makes you sit for the full course if you have the opportunity. Doris, Mike, Michelle, despite what Mike told you, I'm not as brilliant as you think. So I'm the slow cookie in the pack today. I'm going to follow the lead of the academics. I'm just a lowly priest.
Father, thanks very much. So first of all, we invite anyone who has a question for Father to type it in the chat, and we'll make sure we get to as many of these as we can. Father, the first question is, what is the status of Father Tolton's cause, and what is it like working on the cause for sainthood behind the scenes?
Oh, listen, so his status is that he is at stage 2. He's the first stage, he is servant of God. And so when a cause is introduced and Rome gives the petitioner permission to open the cause, every person who is up and becomes a candidate is known as a servant of God. That's stage 1, or the first status. Step 2, or stage 2, is you become venerable once you turn over to Rome the position on the candidate's life. It's called a positio. And it's equivalent to many of the dissertations you guys have done, I'm sure. And so once you submit this positio and the Holy Father accepts it to be a document of historical fact, a document that shows the theological virtues of holiness, they take the historical truth and the theological truth, and they declare the person venerable. So Father Augustus Tolton is the Venerable Augustus Tolton. The step that we're waiting on is the process of taking any alleged miracle that is turned in, and for Rome to acknowledge that that miracle took place through the intercession of the candidate. And we are so blessed. It is so wonderful to hear the thousands of favors that have come in. It is so wonderful to hear the wonderful prayers of intercession being connected at least 52 different languages around the country. The sad news is that we did have a miracle. Why is that sad news? Is because when given deposition, the person being interviewed didn't disclose in the first round of deposition that they also sought the intercession of someone else. And so when the miracle was declared a miracle, nobody got credit for the miracle because the person had Father Tolton as one intercessor and the other person as the other intercessor. So when there's more than one intercessor, nobody gets credit. So the beauty of it is that the miracle was accepted as a miracle, and that's a great joy. So I'm like, okay, we hear you, Lord. I think God was trying to tell us he wanted some more prayers. He wanted some more miracles. So that's where we are. We're trying to promote the cause to get more prayers and more miracles. We hope that you would join us. And I'll even share the prayer for the cause of Father Tolton and his intercessory prayer before we leave today.
Perfect. Father, why were you recruited to work in this unique ministry?
So I'm going to CTU as a 38-year-old man who is on his, in his second rodeo, because this is not my first rodeo. Obviously, you can see the gray hair. I'm 53 years old. At the time, I was 38. I showed up at Catholic Theological Union. I'm the only African-American male studying for the priesthood in a class on campus and off campus of more than 240 students that's going to graduate in my class. And I happened to be in the room with a friend of mine who took me to an event where Cardinal George was there. I'm also a Norbertine, or a Canon regular. And so I walk into the room as a Canon regular, and the Cardinal's making a beeline for the guy standing next to me who happens to be a cousin. God rest his soul, it was Bishop Dominic Carmen. So my cousin and I, we walk into the room, and I thought surely the Cardinal was coming for Dominic. And I was like, okay, Bishop, hold on, because here comes the Cardinal. And I started to turn. He said, young man, I came to speak to you. And I was like, oh, okay, who, me? I was like, oh, okay. I was like, sure. So he wanted to know, what type of Norbertine I was. Was I an East Coast or a West Coast Norbertine. You know how you ask a Marine if he's a Hollywood Marine or a West Coast or an East Coast Marine? Some of y'all military folks, y'all know what I'm talking about. I said, Your Excellency, you'll be glad to know that I'm an East Coast Norbertine from Philadelphia. He says, now what are you doing in Chicago? And then he found out I was the only African-American student. I got involved because I gave an address at that banquet, and he asked me, would I mind going to every African-American church on the South Side and repeat that performance that I gave at the banquet of public speaking, and why did I, as an African-American male, wanted to become a priest, especially at 38. And it was just, you know, what most people would call a delayed vocation. But I don't think there is such a thing. I think God calls us to our ministry, whether it's lay, ecclesial ministry, or whether it's ordained ministry, or whether it's a religious consecrated woman. I think God is right on time. And that was my point with Father Tolton's life. I think that there was a delay, and that was because of the human condition, not because God delayed it. Father Tolton, by anybody's standard, was a little bit late in life when he started his formation and his ministry. And so from that point on, Bishop Perry, the postulator, allowed me, with the Cardinal's permission, to, I took a letter around the Archdiocese of Chicago anytime I had a break, anytime I had a Saturday or Sunday. And the letter simply told the pastor that he could preach a homily for 1 minute and I could get the other 11, and to try to keep it 12 minutes. And it was just a joy when I was in the seminary. So Brother Gerard started on his journey with Father Tolton as a seminarian in formation at Catholic Theological Union about 10 years ago.
All right, Father, here's a question. How might Father Tolton's story speak to campus ministers in their ministries? What wisdom would Father Tolton have for us today on campus?
Tolton was forever a student. He lived a short life of 43 years. And so the first thing he learned was on the plantation, he learned how to live his Catholic life while enslaved. That took so much humility. That took so much of dying to self. And he was able to do that on a plantation of enslaved Catholic people. His master was a slave owner who was Catholic, but Tolton was baptized on that plantation. The church is still there. It's called St. Peter's. And that's the first lesson he learned the first time he was a student. He crosses over into freedom, and he becomes literally a student and a protege of the Irish priest, Father McGurr. And Father McGurr teaches him that he has worth and value, and that he has a vocation. Everyone is given a vocation in life, and that he was no less, no greater, but no less than anyone else. And so he had to learn to fall in love with his vocation, and he did. And he, despite what the world told him, continued to learn what that meant every time he was rejected. Because the Father McGurr's parish church that welcomed him in the back of the church as a member kicked him out of the school because the school wasn't having it. Then he goes on to the next stop, and the German parish does the same. And so he goes to the Sisters of Notre Dame, and he says, will you tutor me? And his mother and little Gus get an agreement that he wants to soak up this sponge of learning, even though he was rejected twice in the classroom. So that's just a beautiful lesson at an early age. If you want to do this, no matter what the challenges you have as a student on a college campus, you got to want this. I mean, and he did it without excuse. Ministry without excuse, and staying focused on the vocation, or staying focused on if education is the goal without excuse, is one of the beautiful lessons he teaches us as a young boy and a young student. When he finally is seen as someone who probably could be a good priest, and even though it doesn't exist as an African American anywhere in the United States. They accept him and said, okay, just sit in the back of the class. And this young man excels. He went from being an ignorant, unread, can't read, can't write, to learning the languages of philosophy, Latin, and Italian. Let me tell you something. The only class I ever flunked was Latin. My Latin teacher saw me coming, and he would just grab his head and he was like, oh, just sit in the back of the class. And I was like, okay, well, I mean, hey. And he said, listen, he said, if you could just sing the Ave Maria, I will pass you so you'll never come through these doors. So I sang the Ave Maria and got out of there. So, but I flunked Latin. Tolton was the guy who didn't have to worry about, am I gonna pass because I got an A or B? He didn't go there for a grade. He went there because he had a love and a vocation. And even though the seminaries would not accept him, he sat in those classrooms anyway because of the love of a priest who allowed him to do so, and the classroom peers who allowed him to do so. So he found love when love was available. He found acceptance where it was available, even though he was being rejected by the seminaries. He goes to Rome at the help of the Franciscans at Quincy College at the time, and he got the networking system he needed. Every college student has got to understand you are not in this alone. Go to the campus ministry if you need it. Go see a spiritual director if you need it. Get you a good confessor if you need it. Go see your academic advisor if you need it. If Father Tolton would have not reached out to his network of people, he would have never gotten to Rome, because the Franciscans called in a favor to get him to Rome. And the first time that Rome responded and said, yes, we'll take him, guess what? The Franciscans and Father Tolton never got the yes letter. It got lost in the mail. So 2 years later, they write again. I mean, that's a beautiful example of why college students, I mean, so what you failed the class? So what you had to take a break because of finances? So what? Quit being a baby. What do you really want in life? What is God really calling you to do? Is this for you? Is this a ministry? Or are you doing this so you can be successful and make a lot of money? Because if you're trying to do this to be successful and make a lot of money, you're in the wrong place at the wrong time doing the wrong thing. That is not the Catholic way. That is not the Christian way. We come to who we are and we come to our true selves because God created us for a purpose, not to make money. Now, part of that is mom and daddy's fault because we send our kids to school to be successful doctors, lawyers, make a lot of money, build me a nice house, buy me a nice car so I can retire. But when the student comes to understand, it's not about the finances. It's about, because I'm so tickled at, just a sidebar, people who come out of academic settings and they become lawyers and doctors and judges, and they say, Father, I can't wait to retire. I'm like, well, why did you go into that job or that career? Oh, I just wanted to make a lot of money. Well, what did you really want to be? Oh, I didn't really want to be a doctor, but I just wanted to be in the healing experience. I didn't really want it to be a lawyer or a judge. I just wanted to make sure that justice came to the world. I said, well, that's what you should have held on to, because that was the gift that God gave you. He made you a healer, not a doctor. He made you someone to fight for justice, not necessarily a lawyer. Father Tolton understood that, and when he finally got ordained, he was willing, he abandoned his family because he thought he would never come back to America. He thought he would go to Africa and be a missionary in the African country amongst the African people, because the African-American priest did not exist here in America. He was willing to abandon his family so that he could follow his ministry and be his true self. What are the students willing to give up? What will you turn away from that is convenient or comfortable? Will you turn away from the peer pressure? Will you leave drugs and partying behind? Will you leave the lure of success and how to get there behind to tap into what God will be pleasing to you and bring you true happiness, and what will be pleasing to God? This is Tolton's story throughout his life. I'm sorry I got long-winded because you asked me a question that just excites me.
Well, it's contagious. And I know at the end you're also going to share where we can get access to some great Tolton resources that are coming out. We've got just one more question, Father. There was a recent article by a Black Jesuit in formation talking about the fact that the Catholic Church has not always been welcoming to Black Catholics, and Father Tolton's story emphasizes this. How can we use Father Tolton's story to do better as a church today?
Well, I want to say, I'm not familiar with the article that you bring, and I don't want to dispute what the man said. I want to say that has some level of truth to it. But the whole truth of the matter is that the racist in the pew has not been welcoming to the African American, but the church as a whole, the universal church, has always been welcoming to people of color. The Ethiopian eunuch is the first example in scripture where the apostle looked at him and said, let's talk. You know, so from the Ethiopian eunuch through time, Augustus, a North African man of color. Now he was probably more light-skinned like me, but I mean, so whether you are African American of the civil rights movement, or you go back in time to the ancient days, the man of color, the woman of color have always been welcomed by the church. What has not been so welcoming is the racists in the pews. And that's important to distinguish the difference. So that's the first thing. Now ask me the second part of the question.
Let's see, how can we use Father Tolton's story to do better as a church today?
We can understand that even Father Tolton said and taught everyone who would listen, the church never turned their back on him. It was the world and the flesh and bone of the human condition when the racist priest called him the N-word in the newspaper. It was not the church. So if we can distinguish the difference between God and our mother, the church, and the flesh and bone, the human condition of the church, then we can maybe stay true to our baptism. Because we're always looking, now this is me preaching, I think we're always looking for an excuse to hit the back door. We're always looking for an excuse to, how can I make it my way out of here? Because there are other things that are more alluring or more inviting or more up to date, like the young folks will tell us. But Father Tolton was quick to say this. The church never disdained him. So he knows the difference between a man rejecting him because of the color of his skin and Mother Church embracing him because of how God made him and gave him the gift of his priesthood and his baptismal call. So that's real important, a lesson to learn from this man, because men spoke very ill of him, called him the N-word. Brother priest bullied him and called him the N-word. And he always knew the difference. He always knew the difference. And that was allowed him. Father Tolton had a multicultural church before the multicultural word even existed. That multiculturalism and the idea that didn't come to our understanding until about the early 1950s, late 1940s. We're talking about a time in the 1800s where multiculturalism was an everyday thing for Father Tolton. Because had he thought that the racism in the church was the church's fault, or the church was responsible for that racism, he would have never been able to have a good, loving, platonic relationship with men and women that was around him, Irish, German, French-speaking women. I mean, it was just beautiful, just absolutely beautiful. So we need to make that understanding clear to the students that, yes, you know, I used to have my mentor, my spiritual director, just God rest his soul, he used to say, the church is the most white racist institution in the world. He says, but I love her so much. And I was like, I'm confused, Father. I don't understand what you just said. You just contradicted yourself. He says, Mother Church loves us and we should fall in love with her back. But just like no mother is a perfect mother, she's going to make mistakes generation after generation, because no mother raises the first child the same way she raises the third child. She learns how to raise the children differently every time a new child shows up. And it's the same way with the church in America. We no longer have segregated pews all over the country. You know, we have multicultural churches now. We have about 300 active ordained Black priests. of African American stripe. We have consecrated women who are Black. So it's just beautiful how, if you understand the difference, the joys that come out of that, and you learn the gospel of Jesus Christ. And it stops being a historical story about a priest who just got, because it's not about Father Tolton. It's really about the gospel of Jesus Christ. I can't say that enough.
Father, I think you told us in the pre-call there's some wonderful new resources coming out very soon about Father Tolton. I just want to give you a chance to promote that and even point us to where we can find out more about Father Tolton.
So if you go in the chat box, there's a link. And there on this upcoming Saturday at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, there is a wonderful group of folks that's offering a story on the life of Father Tolton, what reconciliation that can come if you follow his spirituality, how you can be able to enjoy a restoration in your life if you have severed relationships. So it teaches the legacy and the spirituality of Tolton. And again, if you go on Eventbrite, the link that I've shared, you can register. It's free. Don't you just love it? Free. And one of the featured guests and speakers is the first African-American cardinal, His Eminence, the Archbishop of Washington, D.C., Wilton Cardinal Gregory, who's also a Chicago priest that followed in the footsteps of Father Tolton. 3 p.m. Saturday. Join us.
Father, thank you so much, just on behalf of everybody here and everybody in CCMA. We really appreciate it. I want to learn more about Venerable Tolton. I'm really excited, and I feel like you've really lit a fire under us to learn more, and like you said, to embrace the gospel of Christ more fully. It's about Tolton, but it's more than that. So thank you so very much.
You are very welcome.